In this video, I'm going to walk you through my process for creating this lovely layered circular garden of collaged flowers. I'm creating this drawing in response to the prompt layer, which is the third prompt for MINDFULTOBER 2024, but you definitely don't need to be doing MINDFULTOBER to follow along. This is just a really lovely, kind of relaxing and fun project that you can join in with. So to follow along, you're going to need a selection of a few collage papers. Now I'm going to be using coloured paper, but black and white can work really beautifully too. Or you could draw or paint or colour onto some white paper. You'll also need a pencil, a pair of scissors, and some glue. And you'll also need some art materials to draw with. Whatever you have to hand will be absolutely fine. So through this tutorial, I'm going to be referencing my Botanical Doodling workbook, which is a free resource available on my website. I'll link to that down below. There's a template in there that I'm going to be kind of working to, but tweaking a little bit, and some methods of drawing botanicals that I'll be following with as well. If we haven't met, hi, my name is Mel. I'm an artist and educator and a top teacher on Skillshare, where I teach drawing and mindful art making. If you're interested in mindful art making and learning to draw, then you are warmly invited to join my free Facebook community, which is a super lovely and supportive group of creatives who just love to connect and share ideas and resources around those subjects. So I'll also link to that down below as well. It would be lovely to have you join us. So I'm going to be just referencing this sort of composition guide, which is in my Botanical Doodling workbook for this collage today. One of the reasons why I like to use this is just because it helps you to kind of have a starting point and know what kind of shapes to start working with, because when you start thinking about creating quite a layered piece that's maybe got lots of elements in it, it can feel quite overwhelming. So just having something to start with, I think, can be really nice. Now I am going to use a sort of dark colour for like a background circle, and then I'm going to use some sort of lighter, brighter colours on top for the flower shapes, just so that it kind of creates this really lovely kind of layered effect. It feels like a sort of bouquet or a garden. So the first thing that I'm going to do is cut out a circle from my dark green. Now I would just recommend that you use something in your background that feels quite different to the colours that you want to use on top. Now you've got to think about the materials that you're using. If you are using collage, that's kind of relatively straightforward, but if you were going to be just drawing on top of this colour, it can be tricky if that's too dark. So just think about what's going to work with the materials that you're going to be using and following along with. So I'm just going to draw around this bowl just to give me a starting point to work with. I'm not so concerned about the flower shapes being accurate circles, but I'd quite like the shape that everything's contained in to be reasonably accurate. So I'm just going to cut out this circle shape to start with, and that's going to act as my garden that my flowers are going to be growing in. So notice I'm using quite a small pair of scissors. This is a pair of scissors that I love using for collage. They're actually for, they're meant to be embroidery scissors and for cutting thread. My mum would kill me if she knew that I was using them to cut paper, but I love using them because they're small and sharp, so they're kind of accurate to cut with when you're trying to get a sort of smaller shapes. That's why I quite like them. So I'm using that dark green circle. I'm just going to put it onto a white background just because I think it just helps to kind of lift everything, make it look kind of really strong and boost it all. Now I'm going to just refer to this template here. Now in my Botanical Doodling workbook, I sort of show you how to draw a variety of different botanical elements which can be considered as being contained within certain shapes, whether those are circles, triangles, and there's also some filler elements as well. Now, the biggest elements on here are the circles, so they're kind of your stars of the show. They're like your, you know, the flowers that are going to stand out the most. And I generally recommend that it's a good idea to have an odd number of those, just because odd numbers tend to look a bit more natural, especially when you're arranging them within a small space, like within a circle. You'll probably find that if you had 4 of those, they would look a bit, it would be difficult to make them look natural, whereas 3 or 5, it's actually much easier to make them look more natural. So I think I'm going to use this really vibrant pink for my sort of big circles. Now I am going to draw some sort of big, like peony style flowers on there. Now whatever you have to hand you can draw with. I've got some of these neon colour aquarelle crayons. I love using them because the texture is really lovely, and I've also got some just some coloured pencils which I love using as well. So these are, I guess, a little bit more translucent, whereas these materials here will hopefully give me a little bit more of a stronger colour. Just going to test some of them out on, that's quite subtle, just to see how the colours kind of look. That's quite nice, but again it's very subtle. Oh, I quite like the blue against the pink is actually really nice and quite strong. I quite like that. Let's see what the orange is like. Yeah, the orange is kind of nice as well. Right, so in terms of size, I'm gonna go maybe with the orange to start with, I think. Say one that size, maybe one slightly bigger. Don't worry about them being kind of perfect circles. You know, if we were working with botanicals, they're not perfect circles, are they? They're organic and they're natural. So 1, 2, 3. Maybe I'm going to just start with 3 and see how that goes. So I'm going to make these a kind of stylized take on a peony flower. Let's see how it's going to turn out. I'll put some kind of keep it really simple. I might use this sort of darker colour to shade in the middle, see how that comes out. The great thing about collage as well, I love to use collage because you can just try things out, and if it doesn't work you can just draw another one and cut another one. So it's really nice to use for, you know, just feeling a bit more free. Not sure about the colour in the middle, so might redo that one. I'm going to just cut them out and see how they look when they're against the background. I sort of like to shade in the middle a little bit just to show that that's kind of a different colour, because that's where all the petals are all merging together and folding over each other. I love collage as well for its mindful qualities. So, you know, when you are cutting out your shapes in paper, it's a really nice opportunity to kind of just tune in to the sensations that you're experiencing, the textures of the paper and the scissors. It's really nice. So the way that I like to approach this is I usually quite like to cut out my shapes roughly first and then cut circles more accurately afterwards. I just find it feels a bit more easy to do it that way, I guess. Okay. Okay, so I've got 3 nice big flowers on there. I'll just move these pieces to the side. I feel like they're working pretty well. I think if I had 5, it would probably fill it up. They'd need to be a bit smaller. I quite like how bright they are against the background, which is really nice. So I might actually introduce another kind of flower. These will be slightly smaller. So again, I'll just do some tufts there. That's a nice combination, but possibly a little bit subtle. I think maybe this one is going to be quite nice, yeah. So I'm just going to do something really simple. So something like this. Oops. A circle with another circle inside, and then I might introduce some sort of parallel lines to represent petals, something a bit daisy-like. And again, I am cutting them out roughly first, and then I will just introduce some slightly more accurate cutting. And I'm just sort of spreading these out. To fill those gaps in. So that's quite nice. I feel as though I need more. So these are quite small. I think what I would like to do is introduce maybe some slightly bigger flowers than these that are maybe somewhere between the size of the yellow ones and the pink ones. Maybe some smaller versions of these. And I may just try doing them in this pale pink. feel like the colour of this is working much better than that darker one. So I really like the texture of these. They're quite tricky to draw accurately with because they are kind of a bit harder to control, but I really like the texture of them, which is why I wanted to use them. And it's nice sometimes to do something that's maybe a bit less accurate. I might combine it with some of the crayons in a little while. Let's cut these out. So the prompt layer, the reason why I wanted to approach it in this way is I think sometimes, you know, it's really nice to be able to think about doing an image with lots of botanicals where they are all layered together, because it just feels like a sort of the way that a garden might grow. So think about introducing those. The great thing about collage as well is I love the fact that we can just keep changing things and moving things around until we get to a point where they're happy, where we're kind of happy with how it all is working together. Introduce a bit more space, perhaps. I quite like these smaller ones are looking kind of much stronger, I feel, than the bright pink ones, which feel as though the contrast is not working on these. They're not, the sort of line work isn't really strong enough. So I might just try tweaking those. So we could try either using the orange on there, but again, that's not maybe going to give us something quite strong enough. I wonder about introducing, yeah, maybe something like a dark blue. See what it's like to draw over the orange. Is not necessarily working that well. What I might actually do is just turn them over, because I still have the shapes that I want. So I can just draw on the back. I'm not too worried about the lines being perfect to the cut edge either. I quite like the imperfections that are going to be introduced with collage. It's kind of part of the joy of it. The dark blue is working much better. See. Oh yeah, that looks much stronger now. So it's nice to see that kind of contrast working better. What I love about collage is it really does feel kind of intuitive. It unfolds as you go. I mean, you know, we have a rough plan in the circular garden template here, but I can change it as we go, and that's what's really nice about working with collage, I think. Nothing is permanent, and that's a great approach to work with, especially if you find that you get very easily overwhelmed, or you get very worried when you're working creatively about going wrong, or you know, the blank page kind of makes you feel really worried. That's why collage is lovely, because nothing is set in stone, nothing is glued down. Okay, so we have kind of 3 of each of these flower types. Now these pale pink ones, I kind of feel like they're going to pop a little bit more just because they are lighter. So I'll make them kind of sit, I guess, slightly in front of the big ones mostly. You can play around with what works for you here, and thinking about which particular layers are going to work best on top and which kind of work best receding a little bit into the background. It's all about playing around, trying to find a balance. So I've got my sort of biggest 2 diagonally here. I always think trying to set things up diagonally usually results in something that looks quite nice. So I'll think about that. What's that? Something here, so it feels not too super even. I think I'd like to make a couple more of the yellow ones. I feel like actually, because they're smaller, having perhaps 5 of those would work really well, instead of 3. You can always make more and then not necessarily use them. So we're just trying to introduce a little bit of balance and evenness. I'm not really, I've sort of used more circles rather than the triangular shaped flowers that were there in my template. I don't really feel like I need the circular shaped ones as well, because I've gone with so many kind of circular versions. I love circles. If you've watched any of my mindful art making tutorials or courses, you'll know how much I love circles. They're a very powerful shape to use in mindful art making. Feeling like we need one there just to kind of make the whole thing feel balanced. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with how it's coming together. It's much more simplified than a drawn version of this. If I was drawing this with, you know, pencils or pens, I think there'd be a lot more detail going on. But that's something that I quite like about introducing the collage aspect of it all, is it does feel kind of simplified. It's really nice if you're someone who sometimes finds it difficult to loosen up, let go of perfection. Collage is perfect to help you out there, because it will kind of force you to. You can't be too perfect when you're working with these kinds of shapes. So I'm pretty happy with how the shapes are all kind of working together in terms of balance. Now what I want to do, just to kind of really lean into this idea of layering, is think about just adding kind of a bit more embellishment to the whole thing. And one of the things that I'd like to do is actually introduce a little bit of texture and mark making to the background piece itself. So I'm just going to take this out from here, and I'll just use the back of this, some scrap paper, and I just want to include some marks and textures, because I suppose in the process of adding more marks, patterns, textures, it's kind of my jam. If you don't know me, I'm all about mark making and drawing patterns and repeated marks. It's a really beautiful, mindful practice to kind of repeat the same mark over and over again. And I think visually it just creates so much more interest and depth into a piece that you can create. So obviously a lot of this that I'm drawing here will actually in the end be covered up by some of the flowers, but some of it is going to peep out the edges, and that's kind of what I'd really like, is for that to be, that layering to feel kind of really interesting. I'm just keep turning around the circle all the time, just so that I'm trying to make these marks kind of random, because you will find if you just keep the shape the same and make the same mark over and over again, things do sort of start looking as if you have drawn it that way. So in the interest of trying to make it look more organic, I'm just going to keep turning the paper around. If you're working in black and white, this can still work really beautifully as well. You can, you know, create so much interest from just making different marks, patterns, textures onto your paper. So the thing to try and achieve is just trying to make sure that there's enough contrast between the background and the shapes that you're putting on top. So if I was doing this exact thing in black and white, I would probably be maybe either using black paper for the background shape, or if I was working on white paper, I would probably be introducing a lot of marks and texture into the background to try and darken it down so that it will contrast against those flower shapes. Okay, so I have got my marks on there now, which I'm pretty happy with. So let's kind of put these back on. Let's see if we're almost there. Just need to do a bit of tweaking, I think. Yeah, it's starting to look quite nice. I think what I would like to do as well is just start introducing a few kind of extra marks and highlights with some of my other colours, like this light blue, for example, because it does appear in the background and it's just quite nice to embellish parts, and that's going to stand out quite nicely on that dark pink. Oops. Now I'd like to introduce a colour into the middle of the yellow. I'm not sure if the blue's gonna quite be the thing. It may be, perhaps I will go back to the dark blue and just introduce some shapes which are reminiscent of the centre of a flower, thinking about the, I don't know, what do you call those bits? The bit where the pollen is. The thing that I love about drawing botanicals in particular is you don't need them to look accurate. You know, you can draw very, very simplified versions of what a flower could be, simplified right down to just a circle, but it still works, still looks effective. As you kind of begin to add more layers of kind of colour and decoration onto your pieces as well, the whole thing will start to take on a slightly different feel. So I'm just introducing a bit of kind of pink towards the middle of this flower, of the yellow flowers. I think it's nice to help tie it into some of the other colours going on. And if you wanted to, you could definitely add some leaves to your flowers, some sort of vines as well. There's some nice step-by-step tutorials in the workbook to show you how to draw different leaf shapes. And this would also be very lovely to do as a kind of wreath style illustration as well. And there's a template for a wreath type of design in the workbook as well, if that's something that you would find inspiring. I'm just going to tweak some of the positioning of my, that one doesn't have any pink on. So anything which you kind of lift out is going to appear like it's in front of things, and anything which sort of goes behind is going to look like it's receding into the background. So at this point I'm fairly happy with where things are, and it would actually be helpful to start sticking some things down, I feel, so that I can introduce a bit more detail in places where I want to. Usually you get to a certain point where you really need to have everything a bit more stable before you can figure out some of the final details. So that's kind of where I feel like I need to get to now. I need to stick some things down so that I can kind of work in a bit more detail. I'm fairly happy with how it's looking. It's nice and kind of simple, bold, bright. That's what I was going for. So I'm going to use the back of my template as a bit of scrap paper just to do some gluing. I really recommend that you use lots of scrap paper when you're doing collage, because it's very easy to get really excited at this point. And I've ruined many a collage by getting overexcited and then getting glue everywhere where I didn't intend to get it. So a top tip. Okay, so the thing to think about is this shape here is the one that's underneath, so I can take that one out carefully and glue it down and then put the others on top. It's difficult when you have a piece with lots of overlapping parts to know sometimes which bits to glue first. And that large one as well. So you can have, if you're working within a circular garden like this, or any other shape actually, it can be quite nice to have some of the elements kind of spilling out of the circle. I'm keeping mine kind of mostly within the circle today, just because I want it to feel kind of quite like a simple and quite bold design. But when I'm using drawing in particular, and perhaps my line work is a little bit more detailed, I will quite often break the circle. So I think it kind of is quite nice. It creates that really nice sort of organic feel. So you can see that those marks that I added in the background are, you know, they're quite subtle, but they're just giving it a little bit of extra interest. If it was plain, it would still look nice, but it would just be, I guess, just a little bit more simple. Right, have we stuck everything down? There's a good way to check. Yeah, we have. Okay. So I'm pretty happy with how that's looking now. I don't really feel like I need to add too much. I'm just going to possibly just work into this part with the blue. I've just added a little bit more kind of detail with my with some of these aquarelle crayons, and a bit with some of the dark blue as well, just to kind of give a bit of an illusion of more depth into the middle of those peonies there. So I'm pretty happy now with my collage. You could leave it as it is, you could leave it as just a circular collage like this, or you could attach it to a background piece. Now the background would be great both just as a plain white piece of paper, as I've got it on the background here, or it could work really beautifully on a different colour as well. So I think I'm going to put mine just on this plain white because I like that sort of simplicity when there's quite a lot going on in the middle of the collage. So I'm just going to stick it down and then we're done. So I hope you enjoyed following along with this super simple collage. I hope you were able to relax and found the whole process enjoyable and were able to just tap into those mindful aspects of collage. If you are taking part in Mindfultober, then don't forget to take a photo or scan your collage in and share it over on Instagram. You can find me at Mel Rye. And the hashtag this year for Mindfultober is Mindfultober 2024. If you enjoyed this video, it would be awesome if you could just hit the thumbs up button and also subscribe to my channel where I'll be sharing more content like this. I hope I'll see you again soon, and bye for now.